Hey guys, Tyler here with BassFishingHQ, and if you're not throwing these spring bass lures, you're missing out. So stay tuned, it's gonna be a good one. Alright guys, so here's the deal. I can't just give you 3 bass lures for the entire springtime because that's literally impossible. I probably can't even give you just 5 lures. The thing is that spring is made up of 3 months, right? From March all the way to June. And during that time frame, you have a lot of transition from bass. And it's gonna be different depending on if you live in the north or in the south or in the central, if you live on the west coast. No matter where you live, it's going to be a little bit different. During the spring, you have 3 different phases that the bass are actually going to go through. You have the pre-spawn, you have the spawn, and you have the post-spawn. So instead of giving you guys just 3 lures for the whole springtime, for that entire time, I'm gonna give you 3 lures for each phase that the bass are in. The pre-spawn, the spawn, and the post-spawn. And then at the end of the video, I'm gonna give you 1 lure that actually works in all those phases, and it's one of my favorite lures. Before we get into the lures, guys, this video is brought to you by the Bass Hat. So if you click on the link in the description below, you can actually pick up one of these awesome bass hats made with a wooden bass patch on top. So it would greatly help support the channel. All right, so I'm not exactly sure when you're going to be watching this, so if you're already in kind of that post-spawn time frame, you can skip ahead in the video to those lures during the post-spawn. But let's first talk about the top 3 baits to use during the pre-spawn. During the pre-spawn, you typically are gonna have water temperatures somewhere in that 45 to about 60 degree range. And in that range, a number of different lures can work. Typically, you have bass that are going from their wintering areas, kind of in deeper water and more on the main lake, and they're starting to transition back into creeks and back into the little protected areas where they're gonna eventually spawn. So as they travel from their wintering areas to their spawning grounds, they're actually gonna travel a bass highway, kind of this bass migration route. And along the way, they'll stop at little places here and there that we call staging areas. Now, there's a lot of different lures that can work really, really well during that pre-spawn time frame, but one of my all-time favorites is a chatterbait. A chatterbait or a bladed jig is literally one of the best lures that there are on planet Earth. It's one of the best lures that's really ever been made. It works in pretty much all different seasons, but during the pre-spawn, it really tends to shine. So as far as color goes in a chatterbait, I like to keep things pretty simple. I like your green pumpkins, your whites, your black and blues, but during the pre-spawn, one of the best colors to use is red. As we know, red can work really, really well in pretty much all different types of pre-spawn lures, and it's the same case with the chatterbait. So red is a great lure to use in a chatterbait. Now, where I like to throw a chatterbait in the spring is typically anytime I'm fishing off color or muddy water, and I like to throw it around wood cover, and if I'm fishing cleaner or stained water, I really like to throw it around grass. It's a really phenomenal grass bait. All right, so second lure during the pre-spawn is a jerkbait. And guys, a jerkbait is one of the best cold water lures that has ever been created. When it's somewhere around that 45 to 55 degree range, I think that the jerkbait really shines during that time frame. I really like to throw a shad or baitfish colored jerkbait. I like to throw a lot of different types of jerkbaits. I like the KVD jerkbaits. I like the Vision 110s, just like everybody else. There's a lot of different great jerkbaits on the market. And one of my favorite areas that I like to throw jerkbaits on during the pre-spawn is on points. Points, whether they're on the main lake or whether they're in a creek arm, are a great area to find pre-spawn bass. And this is a great place, especially when you're fishing clear water, to catch bass on a jerkbait. The third lure that I like during the pre-spawn is the good old faithful jig. Guys, and like I just talked about with the other lures, a jig can work pretty much year round. It's one of my favorite baits. I absolutely love a jig. It's known to catch big fish, and it does that. If you can get on a good jig bite, typically you can do really well in tournament. One of my favorite things to do with a jig in the pre-spawn is to actually fish it on creek channel swing banks. Now, like I said earlier, as the bass move in from the main lake to the back of the pocket where they might spawn, they're gonna follow these creek channels as they go. And a creek channel bank is a great place where you can actually hop a jig down the creek channel and kind of pick up those bass as they're coming in. Another thing that I love to do with a jig during the pre-spawn is simply just flip it. Whenever I'm fishing shallow cover, a lot of times if I'm fishing muddy water, if I'm fishing stumps and laydowns, I just love to flip a jig and it catches big fish this time of the year. All right guys, so now we're kind of transitioning from the pre-spawn into the spawn. So let's talk about the 3 lures that really work well during the spawn. Now during the spawn, you're typically going to have water temperatures anywhere from that 60 degree to 70 degree range. Now again guys, water temperature is just something that can kind of help you pinpoint where the bass may be, but it's not always a rule or a law or a truth. So during the spawn, you have water temperature that is 60 to 70 degrees. The first lure that I'm going to talk about, and this may be a little bit different than you're thinking, but it's actually one of my favorite lures to fish during the spawn, and that's a frog. I really like to throw a poppin' style frog, but a frog is a great lure to fish actually when fish are spawning and when fish are on beds. And this is kind of the #1 reason. You will catch some fish that are actually on a bed with the frog. And some guys may think, oh, you're full of crap, but it's the truth. You actually catch fish that are on beds when they have a frog come across that bed. I've done it a lot of times and it typically can catch some really big fish. Sometimes it seems like you can catch the female when you're fishing a frog. Now, regardless if you can actually catch fish on a frog during the spawn, a lot of times what a frog will show you is where bass are actually bedding. So again, we're fishing during the spawn. Bass have made their way to shallow water, they've made their beds, and they're actually on their beds. Now, what happens a lot of times when you're fishing a frog is you might actually have fish kind of come up and roll on that bait. Okay, now this is actually a good thing, right? Because during the spawn, if you can get a fish to actually just come up and roll on your frog, you have now probably pinpointed where a bass is actually bedding. And then that way you can actually go up, whether you're fishing a pond or whether you're fishing on a lake or wherever it may be, you can actually go up and start sight fishing for that bass with a different type of like soft plastic bait. But that frog is what helped you to actually find that bed. So that's one of my favorite lures to fish during the spawn. Now, the second lure that I really love to fish during the spawn, and a lot of guys throw this as well, but it just works, especially during that spawn time frame, and that's just your typical wacky rig, right? I'm talking about a 5-inch or 6-inch Senko, just wacky style, and the biggest thing with the wacky rig during the spawn is you're just going to want to fish it slow. You're going to actually cast this bait where you kind of think maybe there's a bed located, whether that's next to a stump or next to a grass clump or just in some shallow protected area. I love to fish a wacky rig this time of the year. Even if I can't visibly see the fish, I'm just gonna cast this wacky rig around, let it fall to the bottom, let it sit there for a few seconds, and then slowly move it across the bottom. And slow is really key. No matter where you're fishing during the spawn, a lot of times one of the biggest keys that you wanna do is just simply slow down, right? If you can just imagine that a fish is locked on a bed and you just have to trigger it without really actually being able to see it. So a wacky rig is definitely one of the best lures to use during the spawn. The third lure to use during the spawn, and that is your typical Texas rig. And I think that you can Texas rig a number of different baits. I don't think that this has to be a certain plastic, right? Some guys like to Texas rig a lizard during the spring, and some guys like to Texas rig a beaver style bait. I actually like to Texas rig a tube. It's one of my favorite baits of all time. I love a tube. It seems to get bit. It seems to get big fish to bite. I love tubes. A Texas rig is not only great for flipping in areas where you think bass are bedding, but it's one of the best baits really to bed fish with. If you've actually located a bass that's on a bed, you can actually use a Texas rig to flip across that fish and actually hit the fish if you want. That's personally what I like to do. I actually like to flip kind of towards that fish's face and actually kind of just start taking that fish off. Hit him in the head with it, get him turning around real quick, and then sooner or later, he's gonna come, he's gonna eat that, and you're gonna be able to catch them. So a Texas rig is my third favorite lure to fish during the spawn. So now we're getting in kind of the post-spawn time frame. Now it's probably, you know, where you're located. It might be May, might be early June. The bass for the most part have already spawned and they're starting to move off the bank and they're starting to move out to deeper water. Now the post-spawn is another fantastic time to catch fish on a variety of different lures, but the 3 lures I have here I think really cover about any water depth and I think that they catch really big fish. Lure number one that I love to fish during the post spawn is your typical spook style bait. There's a ton of different spook style baits on the market. You have a Sammy, a Gunfish, a Sexy Dog, Zara Spook, Vixen. There's all kinds of different spooks out there on the market, and I'm actually getting ready to do a whole video on spook fishing. So if you guys haven't subscribed to the channel already, hit the subscribe button so you can see that video. But a spook is a great bait to fish during the post spawn. For the most part, after the bass spawn, it seems like they really start to focus on baitfish and shad, right? You typically have a shad spawn during this time of the year that the bass are gonna feed heavily on. They also might eat bluegills during this time of the year. They also might just eat minnows and little baitfish. So I really like to fish a lot of baitfish oriented things during the post spawn, and a spook is a perfect baitfish orientated bait. It just looks like an injured baitfish across the top of the water, and it's something that big bass can't resist. And a spook is probably my favorite bait to fish during the post spawn. The second lure that I'm going to suggest fishing during the post spawn is actually a deep diving crankbait. This is actually probably one of the best times of the year to fish a deep diving crankbait, and I'm talking that immediate post spawn, early summer time frame. Usually you're looking at like late May, early June. This is when bass first start moving from that shallow water and they start getting out to deeper water. And this is where a deep diving crankbait can really shine. A lot of bass haven't ate for a long time during the spawn, so they're hungry, they're looking for something, and a deep diving crankbait is not only a great way to cover a lot of water, but it's a great way to actually get big bass to react to a lure. These are bass that might be a little sluggish after the spawn, and you can still get them to react because a deep diving crankbait just comes whizzing by their head and they just have to hit it. It's literally one of the most fun times to catch fish is when they're doing this, and you can catch giant schools of bass during that post-spawn early summer time frame. So the third lure that I think is really important to throw during the post-spawn, and that's a big worm. Guys, I'm talking about a 9, 10, 11-inch worm. A really big worm can be a really great way to catch big fish in the post spawn. And a lot of times during the post spawn, bass are moving out and they're just pulling off the bank. Maybe they've located a grass bed that's just off of where they had just spawned. And this is a great place to throw that big worm, right? And it's gonna get big bites, it's gonna get a lot of bites, and that's exactly what we want during the post spawn. All right, guys, so that's it. I really think that those are your best spring bass lures. And like I said, I can't really just pick 3 lures because during the spring, you have a lot of different phases that the bass are in, and those phases require different tools, different lures to actually catch the bass. Now, with that being said, there's one lure that is probably one of my favorite lures to fish ever, and I actually did a video on this lure, and it's called the floating worm, right? If you guys haven't seen that video, click on this link right here and watch the video that I talked about the floating worm. This is a lure that I think works extremely well from pre-spawn all the way through spawn and into post-spawn. Guys, it catches a lot of fish, it catches a lot of big fish, and it's an extremely fun way to fish. So if you enjoyed this video, like it, leave a comment if you have a question, and please subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next video.